Saw dudes, after many attempts at taking Lavos Prime to level cap, I have finally succeeded. Lavos Prime, as many of you know, is a very unique frame, and does not adhere to the usual rules of Warframe. He uses cooldowns instead of energy, and has access to all elements on his abilities. Despite his unique skill set, the Grand Alchemist does struggle a bit more than other frames in terms of level cap content. I still wanted to post this video to give everyone an idea of what he is capable of. Additionally, I omitted the use of Incarnon weapons, since many of them can trivialize content. I wanted to put focus on Lavos himself. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. The Lavos Prime build is an alteration of the mecha roller setup in my previous video and does not use the mecha set at all. This is due to the setup and survivability issues that I'll discuss later on. In the aura slot, I used corrosive projection to reduce enemy armor since that was a limiting factor in damage potential. Cutting drift was used to increase ability range alongside stretch and overextended. Archon continuity increases ability duration and allows toxin procs applied to enemies by abilities to also apply corrosive procs. This is massively helpful for scaling catalyzes damage. Archon vitality increases heat procs applied by abilities by 1, which also helps catalyzes damage. Streamline increases ability efficiency, increasing the cooldown reduction received from Swift Bite and Transmutation Probe. Rolling Guard is the last piece holding Lavos together, a band-aid if you will, and grants 3 seconds of iframes. It's the oh crap button. Valence Formation gives us the ability to grant our weapons bonus elemental damage based on the mixing vial's contents after an ability cast. Finally, Swift Bite reduces our ability cooldowns if we hit 4 or more enemies with Ophidian Bite. The helmet ability for this run was Resonator and was only used to increase survivability by acting like a mobile decoy. Lavos has paper-thin survivability, and from my many attempts at level cap, this skill performed the best. Most enemies will attack the Resonator instead of Lavos, allowing him to complete a full ability loop with much less hassle. However, it's not foolproof, as we will discuss in the run later. For Arcanes, I used Arcane Impetus for the extra ability strength and efficiency. The strength is useful for Catalyze, and the efficiency helps with the cooldown management from Swift Bite and Transmutation Probe. Aegis was used for the survivability it provides. The shield regen can be a savior in tough situations, and is generally more reliable than a max-ranked Arcane Barrier. The Archon Shards remained the same for my last build. 2 Tauforge Emerald Shards were used, one for increasing corrosive stacks, and another for increasing ability damage on enemies affected by a corrosive proc. The 2 Crimson Shards were attuned for ability strength to offset some of the negative from overextended. Lastly, I used a Casting Speed Shard for quality of life to reduce the lengthy casting animation of Catalyze and Resonator. The primary weapon I used was Cedo Prime, because what else would I use? This weapon was modded for the standard viral hunter munitions build since raw damage could be provided through Valence Formation. There's not much to say about this build. It's a common theme for slash-based damage over time setups. However, I will say that the inclusion of viral status is important, given that Cedo Prime's alt-fire can prime enemies with viral on top of the 4 base elements and blast, for easier catalyzed scaling. The secondary weapon was Akarius Prime for some AoE damage and corrosive priming. In all honesty, it did not fare well in the latter half of the run and only made self-revival possible during last gasp. The weapon itself did not present any new elements for Catalyze to use, so it was a dead slot. If you want to make the run much easier, just use dual Toxicist Incarnon or Furus Incarnon. The melee weapon this time around was dual Zoren Prime, a big change from Praetos. I primarily used this weapon for its coptering passive to move to and from Exercisers. The mods used were Swirling Tiger, Dreamer's Wrath, Conditioned Overload, Prime Breach, Prime Fury, Weeping Wounds, Blood Rush, Galvanized Steel, Organ Shatter, and Galvanized Elementalist, with melee influence in the Arcane slot. Melee influence was a perfect pairing with Valence Formation when using electricity. Despite this, dual Zoren Prime wasn't used much as a weapon, per se. The Panzer build I went with is the standard I have shown in my other showcases. Tenacious Bond and Reinforced Bond are essential, so be sure to use those since they increase the crit damage and fire rate respectively. This is massive for Cedo Prime's outgoing damage, as you'll see later on. Seismic Bond does not work with any of the abilities in Lavos' kit, minus Vile Rush, which was subsumed off. In this case, I would recommend using Momentous Bond, Tech Enhance, or Vicious Bond. The Panzer Claw build is largely the same as my other showcases. I use Balanced Posture to ensure all enemies are primed effectively. Shocking Claws drastically increases our stats chance and applies electric damage, which is useful for Catalyze and Cedo Prime. Bite increases crit chance enough to give us a crit damage bonus via Tenacious Bond. The rest of the mods increase the damage that the Panzer does and primes them for attacks from our weapons, which is mainly Cedo Prime. Madurai is the focus school I used as usual. Void Strike and Void Fuel made killing Thrax easy, and paired well with Valence Formation's guaranteed stats on hit, especially with Cedo Prime. Phoenix Talent increased physical and operator damage, but does not really help Lavos. Power Transfer decreased the lengthy casting animation of Catalyze, Contamination Wave made headshots against Thrax much more lethal, and the only notable part of Madurai in the context of this run was Sling Strength, which gave a bonus of 40% ability strength, which helped out Catalyze a lot. The amp I used was a standard 147 or Certus Brace, Raplac Prism, and Fad Scaffold. This is the amp I always use and probably will always use going forward, and I highly recommend you try it out for level cap runs. I use Magus Cloud, Magus Lockdown, Eternal Eradicate, and Eternal Onslaught as my operator arcanes. Now let's talk about the run. This was a difficult frame for level cap to say the least. I'll go over the pros and cons for Lavos, then move into a more thorough discussion. Pro number 1, Lavos does not have energy dependency, meaning there's no need to use Nourish, Arcane Energize, or Zeneric. 2, Lavos' elemental versatility is unmatched. Because he can combine all base elements to their respective combinations, he can deal with any faction easily. This gets even better when using Valence Formation, since the elements can be applied to weapons for bonus damage and guaranteed status. Pro number 3, with one of his passives, Valence Block, Lavos becomes immune to all status effects upon picking up an Energy Orb or Universal Orb. This includes knockdowns, allowing us to forego Prime Sure-Footed on the build. 4, Lavos has pretty decent crowd control and damage scaling with his base kit. Ophidian Bite staggers enemies on hit, Transmutation Probe stuns enemies thanks to electric procs, and Catalyzes causes enemies to panic due to the application of heat procs. Lavos' insane damage potential is all from Catalyze, which has exponential scaling with each unique elemental status effect. Now, time for the cons. Con number 1. Since Lavos operates on cooldowns, cooldown management is key. Spamming abilities won't cut it. You'll have to actively think about what ability should be used next, and with what elemental combination, and how to affect as many enemies at once for the best results. 2. Lavos has lackluster survivability, and I'm being nice about that. Despite his high base armor doesn't do much in terms of level cap content. While Ophidian Bite restores health, it doesn't really do much in harder areas of the game. I would have preferred the ability to return shields instead, since he doesn't have any access to conventional shield gating tools. Finally, con number 3. Despite his high damage, Lavos has a subpar kill speed. Since he needs to apply a bunch of elemental effects before casting Catalyze, KPM suffers. Compared to more popular picks, Lavos requires a lot more setup and doesn't offer the same ease of use. Time for the general discussion. Lavos Prime suffered in level cap, and while I could say he's broken like others, I won't. I have to be honest here, and that's what counts. Almost all frames can be brought to level cap with weapons that are extremely strong, like Fenmore, Latum, Dual Tox Incarnon, or Furious Incarnon. However, that detracts from the frame, and is a reason why I use Cedo Prime, Akarius Prime, and Dual Zoren Prime. I did not want to say he's incredibly strong when he has a plethora of issues. For one, his ability casting and elemental imbuement is clunky, especially in high stress areas. I cannot count the number of times I got downed when I was mixing elements and planning my next move. This is worsened when I'm trying to prime enemies for a catalyzed cast, since it requires a buttload of elements to deal meaningful damage. This brings me to my next issue. Lavos Prime can deal with base steel path enemies easily, but as soon as you hit enemies in the multi-thousands, he falls apart. I realized that much of the player base does not reach this level, but it's what I use as a metric for testing, since it's thorough and gives me an accurate feeling of a Warframe's general performance. Swift Bite, the augment for Ophidian Bite, leaves a lot to be desired. It only activates upon hitting 4 enemies, no less. I think it should apply cooldown for each enemy hit, so that players can get rewarded regardless of the number of enemies that are affected. This would allow the ability to perform even better with more enemies hit, and drastically help with Lavos' subpar ability rotation time. My biggest issue is survivability. I've worked with Zoren and Mirage, both of which had a hard time surviving, but they had access to shield gating. Lavos can only do that with Pillage, which did not do well in my other attempts because enemy aggro was still on him. The cooldown made it impossible to stay alive past the shield gate and vulnerability timer. My savior for the run was Resonator and my Panzer, which could take the fall for me if I went down, occasionally. That said, it's still a very big crutch, and I had to use it to even get to level 9,999. It is not something that I like resorting to. So, what's my take? Lavos Prime is not made for level cap. Unless you like finger cramps, I would suggest using another frame. I do enjoy using him in base steel path, and even up to level 1000, but until his kinks are worked out, I would prefer to use another frame. If DE addresses his survivability issues and possibly does a very light rework on him, I can see myself retesting Lavos and reevaluating his viability. I hope this video helped. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you for watching and happy farming. Stay safe.